Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. And I have a co-host with me today. It's very exciting. We've actually made attempts to get this person it's been well over a year. That we had a prior opportunity. I don't know if he knows this, but there was an offer. It was like, oh, maybe we can get this guy. And it didn't work out then, so I'm thrilled to have it working now. He has put characters to screen that have made many, many an individual feel seen. You might have seen any one of 1 through 3 in the franchise of Tales from the Hood. He has a new movie coming out called 57 Seconds. Maybe you've seen some of his episodes of Creepshow that he's directed. Also a history and stand-up comedian and comedy, working on the Chapelle show as well, and doing stand-up independently. Rusty Cundieff, welcome to the show. Is there anything else that people need to know about you before we get started today?
I think I've learned something myself. That's fine. Thank you.
Well, I guess the thing to start with, obviously, the work of Jordan Peele sort of opened a new segment of people's eyes to the way in which I think horror and comedy exist in conversation with one another. And I don't mean that from a horror comedy position. I mean it from a sense of structurally, we had this guy come in and make movies like Get Out, Nope, Us, and, charging on full steam ahead into an incredible, rich and storied career, coming from making things like Key and Peele sketches. And I remember the initial sort of balking at but he's the comedy guy, he's the funny guy. But structurally, right. Horror and comedy have so much in common in how they build up and release for audiences. And I guess I just wanted to talk to you about your relationship with those two mediums in terms of the structural similarities of those two, or where you have found them in conversation as a technician in entertainment. Yes, a creative, but also a technician building these stories and characters.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely horror and comedy, they share a lot of similarities in construction. Basically, just from what you said, you take premises, you kind of go from the premise to a bigger idea. You're leading people down a path, and then you surprise them with something at the end of the road. You take them on a little tour where we either are expecting one thing and we get something else, or we don't know what to expect, but we know we're going to get something, which is more of the horror model. Whereas the get something that you don't expect kind of plays more to the comedy side of things. But basically, you're still taking people on a path. You're doing a little bit of manipulation. You look over here while we're doing something over here. And then there's that moment, either a bigger moment, if you're talking about your third act, or the smaller moments that lead up to your third act, which are these kind of little beats that go throughout any type of story, really, but are more present, more obvious in comedy and in horror, because the reaction is much bigger. You see people watching a drama, they're just kind of sitting there staring. But when you watch people while they view a film that's a comedy, or a TV show that's a comedy, or a horror situation, there's a much stronger visceral reaction and a vocal reaction too.
And you've spanned so many kinds of storytelling across your career. You started out in mockumentary with Fear of a Black Hat, and obviously we touched on the stand-up comedy, and you've obviously made horror films. You've even dabbled a bit in Christmas films, A New Diva's Christmas Carol, Christmas in Harmony, and now you're coming out with 57 Seconds. I wanted to talk about, before we get into the character aspect of it, I did just sort of want to touch on the breadth of what you've done and staying stimulated as somebody in this industry where you can hear a lot of no. You can hear a lot of no in Hollywood and get turned away a lot, but pursuing a lot of different kinds of challenges and keeping your knives sharp in a lot of different ways is something I'm interested in hearing about, in purposes of longevity and having an enduring career like yours.
Yeah, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to my career, I guess you could say.
Sure.
But generally, when you start out in the business, entertainment, broadly speaking, be it as a writer, a director, and in some ways even as a performer, as an actor, people will try to pigeonhole you, which may or may not be a a good or bad thing, depending. If you can become known for a very particular thing, that is how many people become, multimillionaires and big stars.
Mm-hmm.
You go to them, you go to Stephen King for a very particular thing. You're not looking for him to write a story of, a romantic holiday at the beach.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be waiting to be terrorized in
Mm-hmm.
in some way. And so there's a positive aspect to doing one thing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's, weirdos like me who kind of do. I've always liked a lot of different things. I don't know that I started out saying I'm going to do a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's more just kind of like the stories. I try to find something in any story that I do, irregardless of the genre, that connects to me and kind of the things that I'm interested in. So, for instance, Fear of a Black Hat, Tales from the Hood, some of the other things I've done, they all have kind of these socio-political kind of connections or thematics that kind of go through them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other things that I've done. The Christmas movie would be an example, which you kind of go, okay, well, what's interesting to me in this? Because this is something that I haven't written. If I had written it, there would have, I don't know, Santa Claus would have been a Democrat, and there would have been all kind of weird things going on. But I'm taking on a story that somebody else has kind of birthed. So then it's more like, oh, how, what in this kind of speaks to me? Because if you can't find some kernel that you're excited about, it's really hard to do the work. The filmmaking process, though, it sounds glamorous, seems fun. It is fun, but it can be a hard slog, depending on a lot of circumstances, from environmental to the people that you're working with, to the amount of money that you have, to the amount of days that you have, and so on and so forth. So you kind of have to find something that goes, wow, I want to get up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or I want to go to sleep at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and then, work all night, whatever that is. So for me, in those smaller types of stories, I try and find things, this is going to sound corny because this is what you should always do, but it's the relationships that you kind of are playing around with there. And then you kind of have to, I almost approach it like I would approach acting. It's like, oh, what about this story speaks to anything that's happened in my life, so that as I talk to my actors, I'm talking to them about something that's coming from an honest place, and they may have a different perspective on it, and we'll figure that out. But I try to understand the script, the story, and the characters kind of like from a personal standpoint, so it grounds me in a way. And then, like I said, and the other things that I write on my own that are kind of like have other themes that are very important to me, those are in some ways easier, in some ways harder, because they're more precious to you, and your heart breaks more when things don't go the way you want them to.
It's actually the relationships aspect of what you just brought up that I want to take us toward our central question of the character that you connected to, because the movie that you picked is very much a movie of relationships. It's sort of this slice of life story. Tell us who you brought to discuss today.
There is a movie called Cooley High that I saw when I was in high school. And the character's name is Preach. He was portrayed by Glenn Turman.
I wrote a poem for you. Nigga, I know you don't like poetry, but I'm gonna read it to you anyway. I ain't never read my poetry for nobody, not even my mama. See a damn thing.
And he was best friends with the character's name was Cochise, who was Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. And if I'm not mistaken, this was written by I think it was written by Monty Ross, if I'm not mistaken.
It
I have to
was,
check
I
my IMDb.
believe, Eric Monty screenplay.
Eric Monty Russ, right? And he also was one of the writer creators, I think, on Good Times.
Okay.
So, which when this came out, I don't think was out yet. It was either Good Times or it might have been What's Happening Now, or both. I don't know. Check your
we will fact check this
resources. Yeah.
Yes, we will fact check this.
But one of those or all of them, perhaps. I think it was. I don't know that I've ever felt like a connection. Like I had to think about it for a minute when I found out I would be talking to you. I was like, I don't know that anybody's made me feel seen. So I had to really think about it, but I had to go all the way back to high school. Preach was this kid in high school with Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. And it is this kind of slice of life, coming of age story of these two guys that kind of hang out and just have fun and get into trouble. But why I connected with Preach was he was a writer. Now, I can't say that in high school, I knew that I would be doing what I'm doing now, writing, directing, and telling stories. But I told stories then. I would write little stories that I wasn't trying to do anything with them, and I don't even know why I did them. But I was very interested in storytelling and, that sort of thing. And I wore glasses. Preach wore glasses. I was a bit of a nerd. Preach was the nerd. Coach East was the cool guy. I had cool friends, but I didn't think that I was that cool. I was kind of a nerdy guy. And so I just connected with him in a lot of ways. I mean, he was in high school. He was, trying to attract women. He was clumsy. I was clumsy.
Yeah, Preach has no game really to speak of.
No, not really. Nor
until
did
he starts being himself. Like when he's kind of posturing, he has nothing to give. Like he's very uncomfortable. It's kind of like get away. But like once he starts being himself with the one girl he really does have eyes for, Brenda, it's like it was so satisfying finally seeing that character sort of soften into a real guy when he really finds that like he can connect with Brenda on like an emotional level because they're interested in the same things like poetry. And it was like, I'm waiting to not want to slap Preach across the face right now. And that finally got me over the line with him.
Wow. Hey, Brownie. Yeah, I like sonnets from the Portuguese. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Yeah, this is dynamite.
You like poetry?
Oh, yeah, this is pretty.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, girl. But if you really like love poetry, you ought to check out a dude called Walter Benton. He got this poem called, Were I Pygmalion or God, I would make you exactly as you are in every dimension. From your warm hair to your intimate toes, would you be wholly in your own image? I would change nothing, add, or take away. Yeah, that's dynamite. And that poem fits you too, Yeah, it really fits you. Yeah, I'm gonna give you that. As soon as I steal a copy.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, so your memories are a little fresher than mine because I haven't watched it in a few years. And it's funny. I just a couple of weeks ago during the writer's strike, I ran into Michael Schultz, who directed it.
Oh,
and
wow!
I see him from time to time, and I'm always like, Cooley High. He's directed a lot of things, but that movie just kind of spoke to me in a lot of different ways. And, the fact at the end, and like I said, this may have been a kernel somewhere in the back of my head. I like doing plays. I like writing and stuff. But at the end of the movie where they said Preach goes off to Hollywood and he wrote a script, I was like, oh, that's so cool. But it kind of became my journey. Kind of there's a lot of that character that I kind of relate to.
Well, this movie is in Cooley High is in the Criterion Collection. Like this movie, it is venerated, and it is. I mean, I obviously wasn't there in 1970s, but did you, like, it feels like, you know, the way we look at Black cinema at the time, it feels like the sort of explosion of the sort of signature cinema around that time would have been blaxploitation films. And this movie comes out through American International Pictures, which is known for its Roger Corman outfit in movies like I Was a Teenage Werewolf. And then you have this like
Right.
tender, thoughtful, just kind of like slow cinema rollout of just these boys experiencing their lives in Chicago. And also, Eric Monti grew up in the Cabrini Green Housing Project, made famous and infamous through Candyman. So there's a
Right.
lot of layers of significance to Cooley High as a piece of cinema. At the time, were you just watching it being like, these guys remind me of my guys, and I feel like one of these guys? Or were you like, this kind of feels like something special?
You know, it's, you know, yes, if I go back and look at it through the lens of me then, I'm just at the movies
Yeah,
going,
man.
this is me. This is, I totally relate to, even though it's, you know, still even at that time, of course, Cooley High was set in Eric Monti's teenage years, his high school years. So, you know, what, maybe that was 10 or 15 years past, I'm not sure. But, you know, those, the relationships, the characters, what was important to them, which was, you know, what I was going through at the moment. And it once again, it's like not one of those things that I think I picked up on then, but when looking back on it, you kind of go, there wasn't a lot else like that
Sure.
to connect to. That I would say I would call it kind of like an honest representation. It's like I knew those people, and there wasn't a sense of trying to make something necessarily bigger. Any of the events that happen in that film, I could imagine or have seen
Right.
in some way. You know, there was nothing that was so fantastical. You're like, well, that's, you know, now we're into kind of hero crazy territory, which is where, you know, the blaxploitation stuff kind of fell. And even, you know, black comedies were kind of like the few that there were kind of big, but in how they presented things, you know, they were larger than life kind of things. And this just felt really real. So yeah.
Y'all gonna make me drop the wine, man. Oh, man, you just upset because you ain't going nowhere. Oh, man, as soon as I get out, I'm off like a big black bird to Hollywood. I'm gonna be a famous writer, man. Oh, nigga, your ass ain't going no place but jail. Oh, how you know? What kind of trip gonna come from something like this, and all of a sudden he gonna be a big-time Hollywood writer? You crazy. Yeah, well, you can call me crazy when I come back with my first million.
Man, you think somebody's gonna pay you $1 million for that junk you write? Has anybody heard Preacher's poetry?
No, let's see it.
Your eyes are like limpid pools of eternity swallowing up my soul. no, man, wait a minute. There's more. Check this out. Liquid dreams and vision of you beckon to my throbbing manhood.
Copy that out of my notebook. What you doing going in my notebook?
Well, and I guess as somebody, okay, so whenever I get the chance, I like to talk about sort of the bursting palettes of cinema that were on offer in the 1990s. Like a real like independent film, like a Sundance film, had like a sort of rawness and an edginess to it. And they're just, I don't know, it seemed like there was a sort of a little bit more of a possible feeling about making something that could really truly be bootstraps, that could wind its way up and actually like make a cultural impact, as opposed to having to open on 3,000 screens and make $100 million out of the gate to feel like it was deemed successful in like the kind of like current landscape that we have now. And that's not every movie, but I wanted to talk to somebody who was there and putting out film in the 1990s of like, because there is a blooming of black cinema in the 1970s. There's a different kind of it in the 1990s. And there is a sort of hood movie era. We have a lot of amazing black rom-coms at that time, several of which have been spotlighted on this show. And there are like black drama and crime films. Like it just kind of feels like it didn't have to be a black crime film to get made with something like Set It Off. It could just be a crime film with like a tremendous ensemble that would include all these fantastic actresses. Like, can you speak to the tone of sort of like making making films in the 90s and like maybe a sense of possibility that did or did not exist, does or does not exist now compared to then. Like, I just want to hear from somebody who was there. And if it seemed like there was possibility, or if that's just me having rose-colored glasses on the past for something that's like, the grass is always greener.
No, I mean, it was an interesting time. My initial participation in kind of 90s Black independent cinema or indie cinema at all was as an actor. So, Hollywood Shuffle with Robert Townsend,
who makes a tiny appearance in Cooley High. You can see him ever so briefly in this movie.
He absolutely does, because he's from Chicago. But working with Robert on Hollywood Shuffle, and then not long after Hollywood Shuffle, being fortunate enough to have a small role in School Days with Spike Lee. So I'm seeing two guys that are kind of just doing it.
Yeah.
I've obviously seen Spike's She's Gotta Have It, and Joe's Barbershop We Cut Heads, and then working with Robert, going down to Atlanta, working with Spike. And really those two guys, and one other person. There's a couple other people. Seeing John Sayles when I was at USC was a huge influence. And you don't know, I think sometimes you realize it's an influence, sometimes you discover it was an influence later on. Yeah. So I had seen Secaucus 7 while I was at SC, and John Sayles came in and spoke, and he talked about how he made his movie and how he had to he knew what locations he had, he knew what actors he had, he wrote a story to service that.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten about that. And then I'm working with Robert, and I'm like, this is kind of the John Sayles thing. And then you read Spike's basic diary of, She's Gotta Have It and everything. You got, this is a blueprint right here. And so while I was on the soap opera, I was on a soap opera for a while as an actor on Days of Our Lives. And there was an actor on the show there who would go into his dressing room, and I'd hear this. I was like, well, I don't think he's a writer on the show. What the hell's he doing in there? And I said, what are you doing in there? And he said, I write plays. I'm like, no, I should go back to writing, because I had written stuff. And so I started writing as a way to, one, I had ideas in my head. Two, as an actor and even as a comedian to a certain point, because I was doing that, you have to have a stage, or you have to have someone say, okay, you're allowed to act.
Here's permission. You can do this.
Yes. Here's a stage. Go up there and do something. So, but as a writer, you just write. You don't have to wait for anyone to say, hey, go ahead and write your story. You just have to have the desire to do it. So I started writing because of all these different influences. And by the time I was doing School Days, I think I was already writing this kind of, what did I call it? It was kind of like a Black Big Chill. It was, very Secaucus 7, very Big Chill-ish, about a group of friends hanging out. And that story eventually got me to House Party 2 and working on House Party 2 with New Line after Reggie and Warrington kind of stepped away from that because of their whatever was going on with them over there. And, you slowly start to kind of build a career out of that. But back to your kind of question about the 90s, there was this kind of sense that some dams had been broken open, between Spike and Robert and things that started to come up after that. And then, all of a sudden, then you have the Hughes brothers, and then you have John Singleton, and then you have, and Black directors that didn't necessarily do big Black projects. You had Carl Franklin and, guys like that were doing, doing work. So there was this kind of push for things. And then there was a certain point where you become the kind of the flavor of the day or the year or whatever.
I've read you talking about like the cyclical nature of the industry, and like when you're in, you're in. And then you were talking about it with horror, and I thought it was I think it was an interview from earlier this year. You were talking about there's obviously been a wave of big interest in horror right now at a sort of broader mainstream level, and a lot of interest from studios putting money into it. But then you mentioned, and I honestly feel like we're kind of coming to that place now where like that wave breaks on the shore and then the water pulls out again, and it's a new wave that breaks that's coming in.
Yeah. It's and it you can see it in just how things happen, and part of it is technology as well kind of influences it. But I think you're kind of seeing it with the big Marvel type movies now, and there's different types of waves now. There's we're streaming, but only 10 episodes. There's the wave of that. And then you hear, well, we're not into just 10 anymore. Now we want, So these kind of things kind of come in and out. And it can be helpful. It does allow people to break through. You've seen a lot of Asian content break through over here. I'm talking about in the United States. It's always been there. But but people are discovering that more. Some of it, I think, thanks to streaming. I know there's languages that I don't know that I watch a lot of film and TV in. Yeah. My wife is hooked on I don't know, a couple of shows that I don't know what they're saying, but she's really happy to watch it. And so I think technology is allowing us to see the different ways that various cultures tell stories. Because when I look at certain Asian horror, or just how they tell stories in general, I love how they use comedy and drama in the ways that most American storytellers don't.
Yeah, there's a real genre blending comfort in like South Korean cinema, for example, where the combination of melodrama and comedy and horror put in like the Korean wave at the end of the 90s, like the way that cinematic economy came to be at the beginning of the 21st century. It was almost like, hey guys, we're kind of starting fresh, so let's try a bunch of crazy ideas and not be worried about the limits or definitions of things. And it created like this amazing strain of just what cinema that can feel so boundless at times compared to, I feel like, what we're used to over here.
Yeah, and I think that is a more honest representation of people. You go through your life, you go to a funeral, but someone's going to tell a joke about the person that died. You're going to laugh at it, and I think that's something that I've picked up from watching cinema from around the world. It's just how people tell stories that isn't the Hollywood structure, which can become formulaic to a fault sometimes.
We're going to take a short break to hear from some of our other shows on the network. Then I'll be back with Rusty to talk more about his career and his affinity for Cooley High. After that, I will have one quick thing about extended drum roll, please. The fact that this is our 100th episode, you guys. We will be acknowledging that at the end of the show, so stick around for the Love Fest.
I'm Iffy Wadiway, the host of Maximum Film.
I'm Alonzo Duralde, also the host of Maximum Film.
And I'm Drea Clark, yet another host of Maximum Film. Every week, we hosts huddle up,
usually with an illustrious guest.
And we talk about films.
We have film news.
We have film quizzes.
We answer your film questions.
It's like the maximum amount of film talk. That's why we call it Maximum Film.
Maximum Film, the movie podcast that's not just a bunch of straight white guys. New episodes weekly on MaximumFun.org.
Oh my gosh, hi, it's me, Dave Holmes, host of the pop culture game show Troubled Waters. On Troubled Waters, we play a whole host of games, like one where I describe a show using a limerick, and our guests have to figure out what it is. Let's do one right now. What show am I talking about? This podcast has game after game, and brilliant guests who come play him. The host is named Dave. It could be your fave, so try it. Life won't be the same.
Big Business starring Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin.
Close, but no.
Oh, is it Troubled Waters, the pop culture quiz show with all your favourite comedians?
Yes, Troubled Waters is the answer
to this question and all of my life's problems.
Now, legally, we actually can't guarantee that, but you can find it on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. I'm thrilled to be talking to Rusty Cundieff, who, in addition to being a pivotal figure in the history of genre cinema, also directed most episodes of Chapelle's show in the early aughts. Let's get back to our conversation. You know, you mentioned, I've read you talk about it, like how there, and you mentioned here, like there's a strain of sort of like social awareness for a lot of the films that you've made. And, you know, I've read you talking about Fear of a Black Hat, and you were like, if you like hip hop, you'll like this. If you don't like hip hop, you can find it funny. If you really love hip hop, you will not like this movie. If you take it very seriously, like it's such a difficult line to toe, to nail satire and have people be like, yeah, I'm funny, I'm engaged. Wait, there's something else going on here. And obviously what's going on in very much in Tales from the Hood, it's operating at that level. But I guess I wanted to hear from you from, you know, I feel like to layer messaging into one's films, I feel like there is an inevitable desire to convey a common experience where it's like, hey guys, we all know what's going on here, which is why I'm going to like send it up or put it in sort of like the hyperbolic lens of satire or genre. And I wanted to talk to you about like wanting to imbue your experience into your films, or what experience that you felt was necessary to be shared in those forms of like sort of blown out cinema through comedy or through horror or through satire, and why you felt like that is the milieu for you that works the best.
I think in terms of satire, you know, looking back on A Fear of a Black Hat, I think satire, people who do satire well, it's just their nature. It's not. That's a good point. I don't think you can set out to be a satirist.
Yeah, like Armando Iannucci and like Veep and all that. Like that's just where he's operating.
I think so. You know, because it's a way of looking at the world. It's like, and I think it's, you know, it's like with comedians, you know, really good comedians are always, they're needling something, they're poking fun at something. And satire is kind of that same thing where you're looking at the world slightly askew, or maybe you're seeing through bullshit that other people aren't seeing through. And it's a tricky genre. I mean, you know, there were, I think, as you were kind of alluding to there, something that I probably said somewhere, but you know, there were people that would come up to me and say, "Oh, I love Fear of a Black Hat because you hate rap as much as I do."
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't hate rap at all. I actually quite like it. And then there were people who liked rap that really enjoyed the movie. There were rappers that, you know, I ran into Eazy-E. He thought the movie was hilarious. But, you know, at the same time, you know, when I was doing Chapelle's show and, you know, Dave was going through what he was going through, and, you know, we did all these crazy different skits. But, you know, he was like, people would now come up to him on the street and start parroting characters that he said. And he wasn't really feeling that. And I was like, yeah, man, you know, satire is like one of those things that people that are with you get it at one level, and people who you're satirizing, just take it at face value. You know, it's like when I was a kid, there was a show called All in the Family with Archie Bunker, who was a misogynist, homophobic, racist white guy, and you know, his kind of progressive son-in-law and daughter, and his wife, who was kind of under his thumb for the most. And you would watch it and you would laugh because you're supposed to be laughing at this guy.
Yeah.
Because he's a racist asshole. But there are racist assholes in the world that are watching because they're like, well, that's my guy.
Yeah, that's my guy. That's Archie Bunker. I feel seen by Archie Bunker.
I feel seen by Archie Bunker. And so the satire misses them.
Yeah.
And they enjoy it at a very different level. So satire is a really tricky thing. And when it's mass produced, when it goes out like a TV show or, Chapelle show where it's accessed by so many people, then you are going to hit some people that take it a very different way than is intended by the satirist.
Well, and you mentioned, we obviously we're talking about Eric Monti with Cooley High, and he got his start on All in the Family. Producer Marissa has let me know, and I've had this little note sitting next to me for he then would go on to co-create and write sitcoms such as you mentioned, Good Times, The Jeffersons, What's Happening. Eric Monti, a legend, clearly. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, he did quite a bit. Yeah, I forgot. I think I knew that fact years ago that he was on. That he started with All in the Family, but a really, a really great kind of broke down some doors for those who followed.
Well, and at that time, like when you go to see Cooley High in the theaters, is that like a kind of movie that you would typically go see, or was it just sort of like anything that was at the cinema we just popped in and went to? Was that a departure from the kind of movies you were most frequently watching, or was that kind of right in line? And I was like, hey, it's a drama, it's a hangout movie for the most part, on a top level.
It was. I can't say that it was the kind of movie that I would just go and see because there wasn't anything else like that for me to see. Mm-hmm. I was a cinema go. I mean, when you're the years that I grew up, if you wanted to see a movie, this is what you did. Because there were no videotapes yet and all of that stuff. So you had to actually go out and sit in a theater someplace. But we did the morning matinees, we did the westerns, we did a lot of horror, we did the drive-ins, which was a lot of horror. I can't believe my parents took me to some of the movies that we actually saw. You were constantly shocked that, because there were horror movies and then there were very exploitative kinds of, horror movies and the Billy Jacks and all of that kind of stuff that you would end up going to at the movie theater. And then there was all of the 1001 Bruce Lee movies, or pretenders to be great martial arts films that, I could. There were days where you would stay in the cinema and just watch 3 of those things on a loop in a row, and then you would come out and try to beat up everybody with bad martial art moves. You and your friends would fight for 20 minutes and then you get a hot dog. But I would just ingest whatever was kind of out there. Exorcist, all sorts of things that just kind of came through. You would try and get in and see. But Cooley High was, it was just it was almost like, oh my God, what's this? This is dope.
Yeah.
this is hey. And so it was that kind of like, this is so, it was just such a connection that that you feel when it's like you see, oh, there's my life in a way, kind of up on the screen.
Were you kind of a dirtbag like Preacher? He's kind of a dirtbag.
I don't think I had that quality. I think for me it was more the nerdiness and the kind of like he was a follower, and he was trying to emulate, if he could be as cool as Cochise.
Yeah, his Lothario friend Cochise.
Yes, and he just wasn't. And I think those were my connections to Preach.
Did you there's a scene in the bathroom where his teacher kind of confronts him and he's like, you read history books for fun, you read poetry for fun, and you're like generally a poor student. Like I see so many kids come through here that I'm just trying to get them graduated. So when I see someone who actually is a learner and has so much potential in them, I want them to do something with it. And he asks him, he's like, what do you want to do? And the teacher kind of gets exasperated with him when he says, like, I want to live forever.
I don't understand you, Jackson. You read poetry books and history books for fun, and you make the worst grades in 2 states. You didn't even try to make up the midterm you missed. Don't you want to graduate?
Don't much matter.
Oh, man. For 10 years, man, I've been pushing kids through this school just so that when they applied for a job, they could write high school graduate on their job application. That's why when I find a guy who has potential, I hate to see him keep messing up. Son, what is it you want? Huh? With your brains, you can have it. Whatever it is, man, knowledge will get it for you. Don't you want something?
I want to live forever.
Because he wants to be a screenwriter. He wants to come out to Hollywood and see his name up on, up in lights kind of thing. And when did you, because I think you went to college, and I think it was in New Orleans before you transferred over to USC. And I think you made an important note like that you've talked about with coming to USC. At the time when you went, this wasn't like the beloved industry baby that the the School of Cinematic Arts is now, with like celebrities on the sidelines of Trojan football games and like huge endowments from all these names you recognize. Like you came out to USC when it was like a film school in Los Angeles.
Yeah, barely that. I would say. I mean, it was. I think when I came out, and I wasn't in the film school, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be. So yeah, my journey as a performer, writer, screenwriter, filmmaker, whatever. Out of high school to Loyola, I knew that I wanted to do something in TV. And Loyola University in New Orleans had, at the time, a decent kind of TV film thing. They actually had a TV studio with a 3-camera setup, and you could, do a 3-camera show, and you made little films and stuff like that. But I knew also that I was into performing. I did some shows down there, but I was still doing stand-up. But I'm like, I got to get out to Los Angeles. So I transferred to USC, assuming that USC's television program, film program was going to be so far superior. Now, the film side probably was. I mean, even though I think they only took like 5 or 6 students a year, it was a very small enrollment. They were in the ROTC building on the edge of campus.
Wow.
Not these beautiful structures that they have now. And the big thing then was there was a sign over the door when you went into the ROTC building that they were in that said, I think reality ends here. That was the cool part of it. But they only took 6 people. So couldn't transfer into it. So they had a TV journalism thing. Mm-hmm. And it was the crappiest piece of crappy crap that you can imagine. Nowhere near as nice as what they had at Loyola for television. Mm-hmm. So I ended up in I ended up with 3 degrees out of USC, oddly enough, acting, philosophy of religion, and journalism, public relations is what I ended up with, these 3 kind of meaningless degrees.
As somebody who holds a journalism degree, I salute you.
Yeah, right. But that was kind of like my weird, route through college. And in terms of filmmaking, it was weird that my producer on both Fear of a Black and Tales from the Hood, he was at USC when I was there. I did not know him, Darren Scott. And he was a chemical engineering major. I was, if you had asked me at the time.
Wow, you guys are bringing all kinds of different life experience into this job.
Yeah, it was really weird. Yeah, if you'd asked me, I'd just said I was philosophy of religion. But we didn't know each other. And then after I graduated, and I was writing my kind of Black Big Chill thing called The Other Class. And there was a kid that I went to high school with named Courtney Joyner, he's written some scripts. And anyhow, he's like, oh, you should show your script to Darren Scott, because Darren helped produce From a Whisper to a Scream or The Offspring. It has 2 titles.
Okay.
Which I think might be where The Offspring got their name from. I'm not sure which came first, that thing, the band. But anyhow, so I meet Darren probably maybe 4 or 5 years after USC. So USC kind of helped my filmmaking career some. But yeah, when I went there was no Spielberg, there was no Lucas, there was no sound stages. There was nothing really. I think they had some cameras over there, but they wouldn't let me see them.
Yeah, and now the SCA and Annenberg are like 2 of the most noteworthy colleges on the USC campus. They're just a shade on the early side.
A couple years early. Yes.
To me, that's a through line. Like, you grow up going to the movies, not an uncommon experience, like going just like, hey, whatever's at the movies is what we're seeing, because that's how you watch movies. And you go cram in 3 in a day, and then you come out and you do bad kung fu on the street, or you like finger guns shoot at your friends because you just saw a Western. And then like you go off to college and you're like, well, I'm interested in this one thing, but along the way, I'm going to be a philosophy of religion, a public relations, and a journalism major. And then like coming into your career, like what we touched on at the beginning, like the breadth of kind of different things that you've done, I feel like what I'm seeing from like your teenage years to your college years, what we're talking about now, and like your accumulative outcome, you just sort of follow the most interesting path. Like you like, it doesn't seem like, well, I've always done this one thing, so I should keep doing this one thing. Because there is certainly a joy in being pigeonholed, because boy, if people want to keep coming to you for the same thing, and you get like better shots to kind of like refine your one little niche, but you're a Renaissance man.
Oh, well, okay. If that's
you're
what
a Renaissance man.
Yeah, but sure, I'll take that. I would say that the through line for me, for most of the things I do, maybe a Christmas movie here or there being the exception, is the stories that I am interested in telling and the things that happen in them. That's what kind of connects them. There's usually, even in 57 Seconds, the one that that's just coming out with Morgan Freeman and Josh Hutcherson, there's, though it's a sci-fi kind of back in time travel thing, there's some important stuff that actually connects to what's going on in society in terms of drug use, in terms of how we deal with technology and AI, and just a morality thing in terms of, and that's something that I'm always interested in. That it's like the tug between, it's good and evil, but it's good and evil within you. You know, how you deal with yourself in the world, less than, here's a hero and he's perfect, and there's a villain. I'm really interested in how the fights that we have with ourselves in terms of how we deal with our others, the other people out there.
With that being a thread that we can pull through your career from, beginning to current, you've obviously you've gotten older and you've become very, very experienced. Do you find that your approach to untangling those knots as a storyteller has changed? Like over time, as you've learned lessons, you're like, I've really learned that, this is how I want to dig into interiority? Or are you like, no, I've had a method since I started this career, since I was younger, and it's really seen me through. Like, how has your approach to that sort of like the solving of the problems in a narrative sense? Has that stayed at its core similar, or have you grown a lot in that process?
It's a tough one, because I think what's difficult about that is what excites me and what interests me is the same.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like what interests me and how people relate, and social relations, politics, religion, ethnicity, all of those things have always been important to me and still are, and kind of inform a lot of the stories that I'm personally passionate about. I think what has changed is my understanding of how to use the medium better. With each film, with each script, you go, oh, that's a better way to, get the emotion that I want, or get across the idea that I'd like to get across here. Or you learn a better way to work with your actors, a better way to communicate with them. And so becoming more technically aware, or better understanding how to use the storytelling techniques to get where you want to go, that's the big change. That what makes you want to do the work, the passion for doing the work is kind of the same, and I see that in a lot of filmmakers and storytellers that I admire. Maybe admire, I'll say names and understand I'm talking about their art and not them as a human being.
Sure.
Because that there's a lot of crossing between the artist versus the artist's life now. So if I say that I see that in, like, if you watch a Woody Allen film, he's always dealing with the same issues in different ways.
Inarguably true. Yes.
Inarguably true. Or Scorsese, most of his things are dealing with this kind of Italian outlook, sometimes gangstery thing. But these really great artists tend to mine the same areas because it's what they're really passionate about.
Yeah.
And I think I'm passionate about the same shit. But I hopefully am learning how to display that in a better way.
Well, now that we've put that coda on your life, I think that that's a great place to conclude for us. Rusty, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to talk with me today. I've been hoping to get to talk to you for a very long time, so this is very nice.
It was a lot of fun. You've got a lot of knowledge, so it's been more fun than most of the interviews.
Yes, that is what we seek to do. We seek to really be a highlight of your press day, Rusty.
Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you. What a delight to talk with Rusty Cundieff at last. This has been at least a year in the making, I'm going to say. His new film, 57 Seconds, is available to rent on most streaming platforms, and several of Rusty's most well-known films are streaming on Tubi, Fear of a Black Hat and the first two Tales from the Hood movies. No big deal. Me and Rusty just both with movies on the same streaming platform. That's fine. You can watch Give Me an A and Tales from a Hood back to back. You can do that. That's an option you have. And now that very special, one quick thing before I go. It's the 100th episode, you guys. We've done it. It's been 2 years of the Feeling Seen podcast. It's been 2 years. We started this show with like real early on. We dropped you a Susan Orlean episode for you guys practically on Thanksgiving. One of my favorite episodes ever, the Isabel Furman episode, came shortly after that. Still one of my personal all-timers since then. Oh God, we've talked to Paul Feig about alien movies and sci-fi, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We've talked to Chris Landon about Mommy Dearest and his life growing up as an industry child. We've talked to Eureka O'Hara about Never Been Kissed. We've covered movies like Get Out and Now and Then and Harry Potter. I mean, a recent, I'm going to call it instant classic, Cameron Esposito talking about Bound. Emma Seligman, who I've been dying to talk to for years now since Shiva Baby come out, to talk about my all-timer, Jennifer's Body. Carter Smith coming on talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the gay one of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Jessica St. Clair talking about best friends on screen with professional best friend to so many awesome ladies, including the awesome Lennon Parham, Jessica St. Clair. I could just keep listing people. I could just keep saying names. Raul Castillo, Manuel Betancourt. Like, I could just keep listing off names, and it would end up as a murderer's row of conversations that involved a lot of laughing, a little bit of crying, so much wonderful, appreciated, generous sharing by the co-hosts that we have on the show. I love doing it. I love doing the show. I love having these conversations. I love seeing where they lead us, having my research and my suppositions before I go into these talks, and then discovering actually while they're happening where they're going to go in progress. It's never any less cool. So happy 100 to me. Happy 100 to you. Tell your friends to tell friends, and stick with us because, you know, I think we've only got an even better, brighter future ahead of us, much like you all out there, listeners, on the Feeling Seen pod and here on the Maximum Fun Network. Go listen to some back episodes. Go share some back episodes, because that's our show. Let's all reminisce and get weepy-eyed with our favorite Feeling Scenes. And you can follow us on Twitter in the meantime at Feeling Seen Pod, or send us an email at feelingseen@maximumfun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm Jorkru on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. This show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Shouts out to 100 episodes, Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
Supported
directly
by you.